And so Shanghai is also preparing itself to defend its citizens and to defend the city.
Welcome back to Shanghai, Mr. Secretary.
It's a great pleasure to be back.
Your first visit to the city is in 1998, when you were then the Prime Minister of Portugal.
Yes.
So do you still remember what impression of Shanghai that impressed you most?
Well, I have to say that they were starting to build Pudong.
Yeah.
And you can't imagine what it is to come a few years later and all of a sudden to see a complete new city. Well, I think that Shanghai has become very clearly the window of China for the outside, but also a very important center where both culture, science, technology and innovation make it a vibrant city and an absolutely fabulous city. I had the chance to visit an art gallery. I had the chance to visit this scientific center. I had a chance to be in the new train,
wow, the
magnetic train.
Yeah, magnet.
And indeed, Shanghai impresses me enormously as a city that combines the highest technology capacity with simultaneously a very humane nature, and at the same time a city that is open to the world, a city that is the bridge between China and the rest of the world, and a city where the most sophisticated forms of innovation are taking place, and at the same time the cultural diversity of China is fantastically represented.
Thank you. And I would like to say something which is quite important. I mean, tackling the challenge of climate change has always been a major focus of your tenure. Shanghai has made significant strides with its electric vehicle, renewable energies, and green initiatives. So what further steps do you believe are necessary for Shanghai to become a carbon neutral city? And are there cities globally that you see as models for this transition?
Now, I think Shanghai is moving clearly in the right direction. The number of electric vehicles now is a majority in the city. We have a very strong bet on renewable energy. And at the same time, Shanghai is perfectly conscious of the impacts of climate change. Shanghai is a low-lying city. Sea level rise is going up. So Shanghai is also preparing itself to defend its citizens and to defend the city against the impacts of climate change. This combination of mitigation and adaptation is, I think, something that all cities in the world should adopt.
And back to the theme of your visit to China this time, you have shown strong support for the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, the FORCAC, describing it as a model of South-South cooperation. So how does this cooperation benefit the global stability and prosperity?
Many African economies are in a desperate situation, and the international financial system as it exists today is unfair, outdated. It was prepared after the Second World War. It represented a world that no longer exists, and it doesn't support developing countries as they need. We need reforms in the international financial system to make it represent the reality of today's economy and to support Africa. So Africa is indeed the victim of all the injustices and inequalities of our system. In this context, the cooperation with China is extremely important because that cooperation allows to provide very meaningful investments that Africa needs and investments that must be linked to the priorities of Africa, investments that must mean sustainable, investments must have integrity, and I believe this is what President Xi Jinping has announced several times about the characteristics of the cooperation that he wants to have with Africa. At the same time, there is a lot African countries can learn with China and a lot they can benefit with Chinese investment and Chinese support.
And the theme of this year's summit of FOCAC is joining hands to advance modernization and build a high-level China-Africa community with a shared future. And what new opportunities could arise for African countries from this collaboration?
I think that China's cooperation with Africa can be extremely important in building modern infrastructure that is green, in supporting the capacity of African countries to fully benefit with the progress of the digital economy. And by the way, it's not by chance that China has presented a resolution in the General Assembly exactly on capacity building for artificial intelligence to the benefit of developing countries. So these are the kind of things that I believe when the word modern is expressed in the title, these are the kind of things that China can enormously help Africa to overcome its difficulties.
But there have been concerns about the debt sustainability in some African countries with Chinese investment. And what collaborative measures do you suggest China and Africa countries take to promote economic growth while maintaining financial stability?
Well, investments must be sustainable from the environmental point of view and sustainable from the financial point of view. There are situations in which debt relief is very important. And I know that China has in several situations considered the possibility to extend the time in which countries can pay and to reduce the interest rates. But let's be clear, the African debt problems did not appear because of Chinese cooperation. They are old problems that always existed in the African context. And of course, China, as a country that cooperates with Africa, will, I'm absolutely sure, have a very positive attitude in this regard.
China is nowadays playing a more and more active role as crisis mediator, builder of peace, and promoter of cooperation. So how do you see China's role evolving in multilateral settings and addressing international crises?
It's absolutely essential that countries that have the influence and the power that China today represents in the world engage in mediation, engage in dialogue, and become key factors to help us make this world move into a much more peaceful one and make those situations that are causing such a huge amount of suffering being quickly solved.
Next year will mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, as well as the 54th anniversary of the restoration of PRC's lawful seat in the UN. So how would you evaluate China's contributions to the UN's mission over the past 5 decades?
China has been a very strong supporter of UN activities. China is a pillar of multilateralism, strong supporter of multilateral institutions, of the UN. Now that we are discussing artificial intelligence, China was the first country that said that it's important to have some global platform of governance and that it should be centered in the UN. So there is this very strong commitment of China with multilateralism. And on the other hand, when we see that we spoke about conflicts, we spoke about many other, I mean, there is a basic question, and that question is the need to develop much more effectively the poorest countries in the world and the developing countries in general. And that cooperation with China is probably the priority one at that moment, and that is the reason why I'm coming for the China-Africa Summit.
Yeah, and Mr. Secretary General, you've shown a great appreciation of the Chinese culture, including greeting everyone with 春节快乐 this Lunar New Year. And could you share memorable experiences from your visits to China?
Well, China has a sense of historic patience and strategic thinking. China does not act for tomorrow. China acts taking into account the future. And in international cooperation, this is absolutely vital, because we have so many crises that are the result of this short time thinking, that the strategic vision of China and its historic patience that China has shown so many times is a fantastic contribution to what we hope will be a much more peaceful world order.
Do you happen to read any books about China or something?
Well, I read many history books about China. I'm a passionate reader of history, and the history of China is an absolutely fantastic source of things that we need to learn about human nature and about the world. And so a very important contribution for my own training as a politician first and as a Secretary General of the United Nations now.
Any particular philosophers you admire?
Oh, Confucius is of course the name that everybody talks about, and indeed I think that he has left an imprint that even today is extremely, extremely clear in China and in several other countries of the region.